Welcome, welcome to a Friday Fireside Chat.
Thank you, Rita. It's an honor, a pleasure, and I'm just giddy being here because, as you know, I'm a big Rita fan. I've been for the longest time.
Oh, that's great. So maybe let's start off with, you were going to tell a story about how we met, which I did not remember.
Yes. So it's 2002, and our new CEO, fairly new, came from General Electric, and wanted to have the same kind of leadership development program that he had when he was at General Electric. So we got this, building converted to a leadership development center, and we were all talking about, oh my gosh, all these managers and business leaders are going to get this training, and then I get called for this training. It's just starting out, and I'm thinking, is this an error? Like, I'm in the lab. Do they know this? I mean, like, I'm a scientist in the lab. I don't run a business. I, don't do this, don't do that. But there it was. So I was very nervous about it. It's going to be 17 days and you're going to get classroom style learning. Then there'll be these projects and you'll be solving these big problems for the company. That was just not my world. I mean, I knew how to run experiments. I knew how to develop products, technologies, patents. This was a different world. I must say, though, I've always been interested on the strategy side, the vision side, pulling thoughts together, describing things in a very simple way, sort of communicating what we're doing, why we should be doing that. So I went there with an open mind, and the first week was just phenomenal. There were these great speakers, Marshall Goldsmith, I mean, you name it, and you had the top ranking. So, you'd run quickly to the bathroom, next talk, and it's the two-stall situation. And all the women are lined up, and they're, and I see at the end of the line, there's this lady in a blue suit, powder blue suit. And I'm like, not seen her at 3M. I don't know many of these big wigs here. And we smile, I'm in the first of the line. I apologize. It's going to be a while before you get to the end. And then we go back to class, and she turns out to be our instructor. And it was somebody who said things that everything she said resonated. And my notebook was just getting filled. And I was like, it's not beginning to sound familiar. Do I know this? And then I go back and I check. I have the book, Entrepreneurial Mindset, and it's Rita McGrath. So that's how we met. We never officially met, but it was me thinking, who is this person in this beautiful powder blue suit? And now everywhere I go in the world, Rita, I realize that as the speaker walks in, people clear out and they say, okay, you go to the bathroom first. And wherever I am in the world, Russia, Brazil, China, Turkey, I think about you because I'm like, sorry, Rita, we should have let you go in front of the line. So not only have we met, you travel with me everywhere I go. How about that?
That's exciting.
And I was just amazed with everything you said. And now in looking back, it's very interesting. My daughter asked me, how many women were there? And I said, you know what? Now that you ask, Rita was the only one.
In the program.
Yes, we had so many speakers and thinkers and leaders come in, but you were the only one, Rita. So now in hindsight, I'm like, you know what? Maybe that's another reason why everything she said resonated, not consciously, but back then. So that's how we met.
That is a great story. I did not know that. Yeah, the bathroom lines are an interesting thing. For many years, I was part of the design team for the Microsoft CEO Summit. And I have to tell you, it was the only time in my entire life where there's a line of men like down the hall waiting for the men's room. And the women are just zipping in and out because they're so few of us.
Yeah, that two-stall situation doesn't help. But now we have a beautiful customer innovation center where we do most of our meetings and things like that, and it's there's no issues there. So I'm happy to report that.
So tell us a little bit about Jayshree's story, your journey to where you are now.
So I grew up in India. And I did my undergrad in chemical engineering there. My dad was a university professor. And I grew up in what was this premier engineering institute in that town. And so all the kids were expected to go there. And so we were strongly encouraged, both my brother and I, to become engineers and go to school right there. Now, I didn't get in, so I had to go to school somewhere else. My parents were really committed to my engineering education. The problem was I was very much a humanities person. I was so drawn to those subjects, so drawn to that context. It was so powerful to me. And I always wanted to go down that route. But, I ended up becoming an engineer, and I'm glad I did, because I didn't realize that the strong humanities context would be my biggest asset in doing science. So then I came to US for graduate school. I did my master's and Ph.D. in chemical engineering. And then I just happened to end up as a summer student at 3M. Just loved the environment, the different things they did, and I got a full-time position there, and I was like, okay, I'm taking it. So the following year I graduated, and I joined. So I started working on, components for disposable soft goods like diapers, and I'd never seen a diaper before. It was very fascinating to think what this product does and how important it is, and who the little users are who never get to express how they feel. So I think right from there, the empathy and the human context became so important. And then I worked on different things and different programs, strategic programs, intellectual property initiatives, innovation programs, technologies and products in different markets. And then I became a Design for Six Sigma Black Belt and teaching the methodologies. And then I went into new areas and figuring out adjacencies and other areas that we could grow our business into. And right now I'm in Industrial Adhesives and Tapes division, which is the division that makes adhesives and tapes for industrial purposes, not the consumer one that most people know and love. But we like to say you're never far away from a 3M product, because your phone or your something in here has been put together with our adhesives. And then I also have this additional role called Chief Science Advocate. And this role was just recently created in 2018. And the role is just about advocating for science, because based on a survey that we did called 3M State of Science Index, we found that the world doesn't actually appreciate science as much as you'd like to. Of course, things have changed during the pandemic, and now science is at the forefront. So that's my journey. I've been at 3M, so now 28 years.
Wow. That's unusual in this day and age, to be at one place for so long.
Yeah, I just love it, because we are in so many different businesses, so many different markets, so many different products, technologies, so much going on. And you don't really have to leave the company to find new experiences and things like that. So I really love it.
Well, and I think that's a lesson for employers in general, which is if you can create an environment where people can continue to grow and develop, they don't need to leave to find other solutions. So part of your study, the state of science, was that I think the statistic was 4 out of 10 people don't believe that their lives would be any different if it weren't for science.
Yeah.
That's a stunning finding.
Shocking, isn't it? So I'll be honest, when they were doing this survey and and I was just like, of course people care about science. I mean, are you kidding me? So that's the one thing I have learned, is there are things that you implicitly assume you shouldn't, because you really don't know. So when these results came out, I was just like besides myself, like, I don't believe this. And then of course you find out that they were taking the survey on their laptops and mobile phones. So you realize that science is invisible, science is underappreciated, science is taken for granted. That is the problem, but it's a real problem, right? When 4 out of 10 said that. So we obviously realize that you need to advocate for science. This is not some data that we can keep at 3M. This is something that we need to share with the world and foster a conversation, because people need to realize that it's taken for granted and we need to bring it in the forefront. And that's why really my role was created. And I was initially thinking, why me? I wasn't the one who, as a child said, I want to be a scientist, I want to be an engineer. That wasn't me. But then I slowly realized that there's a lot of things we say about science that perhaps are not inspiring people like the young me, because we're not talking about the context. We're not talking about the human context. We're not talking about the things that I wanted to do, which is like help people improve lives, solve problems. And that's exactly what I'm doing now. So I thought, you know what, this is a good role for me to bring that context, especially as I was seeing it with my kids as well. For my son, content was sufficient, but for my daughter, it was always the context, which we don't talk about because we just focus on the content. So I've been very excited to take this role and sort of bring my own story to it, and also what I'm hearing from the younger generation, frankly, where boys and girls both care about the purpose and the social aspect of what you're doing with the science and the humanities of it.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you've talked about is combining the human with the technical. And I think that's increasingly what we're looking to, corporations for problem solvers to really tackle, which is how do we leverage the fantastic things we're discovering, but use it as a force for good.
Absolutely. I think what the pandemic has really shown is how important the humanities context is for science. There are people involved, real people with real perceptions, and it impacts all of us. And so keeping that humanities context forefront, I think it's important. I should mention that in 2020, we did a survey during the pandemic, and it was very interesting. For the first time, we saw trust in science go up and skepticism go down. And it has maintained itself in 2021 as well. So when people saw the human context of science, science got personal with the pandemic when it is about your health. And suddenly people started realizing that, oh, we're all in this together, all confronting the same fears, facing the same threat, and all awaiting the same gift of science and the vaccine. And science was center stage. Scientists were center stage with a very human face to science, and, with public policy and frontline workers and all of that. And suddenly people realized the importance and how important that human context is. And even with everything that we're seeing, whether it's the therapies or the vaccines or the way the information is disseminated, the human context is so strong with all of that. And I think building that in helps not just science, but the adoption and the adaptation and across the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely vital. And I mean, you may not know this, but my parents were both scientists. So
I saw that.
Yeah, so my mom was a microbiologist, and kind of an interesting story with the women in leadership angle too, because she started out wanting to be in agriculture, doing big animals, and hit an absolute wall. People said, women don't do this. You can't, she was basically rejected from every program that she tried to get into. And so she turned instead to little bitty teeny animals, microbes. And that was a relatively young field. So they hadn't built up all those barriers yet. So she was able to get into that. And my dad was an organic chemist. So he was one of the world's leaders in selenium and tellurium chemistry of all things.
Wow. No, so I saw that yesterday. And I was like, oh, wow. So you bring that scientific thinking to your, work that you do, and I'm bringing my humanities to the science that I do. So it was just the perfect. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's an interesting combination.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about your background, because I do think there's something to be said for, the background that you come from, the respect for education, the platform that gives you, like when you contemplate your own future.
Yeah, I think the idea of science advocacy is so important, because if we don't advocate for science, there are far-reaching implications of that, and which we are beginning to see some of them, right? The other issue that I see is if we keep those same stereotypes that are out there and don't dismantle them, you're not really inspiring the next generation to pursue. And we need that diversity of thought. And we need those different ideas and backgrounds and perspective. And so if we just have these archetypes and stereotypes which really fail to inspire, we are going to suffer as a result of that. Just science, innovation, all of it. So the idea of me being a science advocate also brings in the whole idea of a woman in science. It brings in the humanities context. It brings the parent perspective, and the fact that I have had innovation in my career, and developing products and doing that. And you can still do that successfully while being all of the above. So I think there's a lot of things sort of rolled into it. And this only I'm finding out now, because you don't realize what people see sort of when they see you. And I've been thinking about that a lot, because that's not something that I paid a lot of attention to. But when you start thinking about it, you realize that what you see is not what people see sometimes. So I see, a parent, a STEM professional, an American of Indian origin, but what are others seeing? Others are probably seeing, a woman of color in a male-centric profession. My head is telling me I'm well-educated, fairly privileged South Asian immigrant. And then when I'm among Indians, I'm further identified, by my language, region, religion, etc. So all of that with the personality traits, your professional journey, your life experiences, that just allows you to bring your perspective into something. And I really feel that when you're sharing your perspective, you need to have that point of view or vantage point. So we really hope we're moving the needle on science advocacy with this role and this platform that we have at 3M that we really value, because science is important to us. Our brand promise is science applied to life. So we care about science, and we want the world to care about science for the right reasons.
I think that's great. So let's talk a little bit about 3M, because I mean, it's a fascinating company. It's the stuff of business school case studies. It's every time you ask somebody, tell me about an innovative company, and 3M's always like at the top of mind. So how has the company changed since you've joined? I mean, you've been there quite a while now. So what do you see some of the big changes or adaptations, or maybe there haven't been any? Maybe 3M got it right from the beginning. It's just stuck with it.
Yeah, no, you're right, Rita. It changes, with the outside world changing. There's all these things that need to change internally to meet up with the customer needs and the market trends and whatever's going on in the marketplace. The thing that is really empowering to people like me, and when I say people like me, I mean somebody who's a little bit of a generalist. My master's was in a different area. My Ph.D. was in a different area. I worked on growing diamond-like carbon films, and I started working on diapers. So, I'm quite a generalist, and that culture of empowerment, that is still there. And I think that is what we need to keep alive. And what I mean by that is the things that people talk about, the storied culture, the 15% time. So the 15% culture allows you to be empowered to work on whatever you think is important for the company and does not have to relate with what you do in your day job. And I think that's really important for people like me to be empowered. I see a problem. I want to solve that problem. I want to work with a group of people, collaborate, and be able to do that. So that is still alive and well. The second thing is, how do you bring technical people together? Like, there are silos in many other places, because I go around the world talking about this, and I say the 3M got it right. We have so many ways to bring these technical people together. It's called Technical Forum, and we are constantly thrown with each other. And when you are thrown with each other, you learn about what somebody is doing. You bring your problems, there's ways to facilitate that, and suddenly you've made these uncommon connections, which we like to say. So now you've got this 15% empowerment. I want to solve that problem. I'm thrown with these people who I know who I can work with, because they can use their 15% time to work with me on solving this problem. How do we get funds to do that? Well, 3M has funding mechanism. It's called Genesis Grants, Discover Grants. You can get $20,000, you can get $100,000 to work on an area of your liking that you want to solve a problem for 3M and you think it's important. So I've got numerous of those grants where I say, we're going to solve this problem. I'm going to work with these people. We get the money to do it. So we have the expectation that you should be innovative. We have the risk taking, we have the resources, we have the opportunity to then turn these into products. We get reward for that. And then you have the constant socialization of the concept of being innovative. So that's what I think is at the heart of what we have maintained, which is so important to maintain. And it has to brave through all the changes that happen, which will happen to keep up with the times and leadership principles and management theories and everything that happens. But if we can keep that alive, I think we're set. Because at the end of the day, and you and I were talking before we got online, is that the innovation that's where it's at. Like, it's the people. It's not a process that drives the innovation. It's those people, and putting those people together, empowering them that they can solve problems. I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is becoming much more conscious for people is the difference between organizations which have more of a command and control concept and those which really do, I think you called it empowerment. A friend of mine calls this the permissionless organization. And, even Jeff Bezos is famous for saying, even well-intentioned gatekeepers slow things down. So it sounds almost as though you've got these structures in place which allow people to take fairly independent action without having to be, asking permission.
Yes. And I think the thing that we have to do is to remind people that this is permissionless. I love that word because you're empowered. We can't wait for someone to say, hey, what are you going to do about this? Or yes, you can do something about it. It's like, I'm doing it. And this is part of what our culture is. And that's how we can propagate that culture. So I'm always out there telling people to be emboldened and empowered, because if you aren't that way, it may get taken away. You know what I mean? It's that empowerment zone that we need to live in, where we say, it's our right, we're going to do it, and we're doing it for the company. So there's always this healthy tension between process and people, and you know how it is. And so I think it's very important for us to keep talking about this and implementing this and socializing this, because it's important for the impressionable minds who join the company to see that this is what allows for some of the groundbreaking innovation. And of course we need process, and of course we need all of that. But at the end of the day, that's where the innovation happens, when you make those uncommon connections and you feel empowered to act on it, right?
So what makes an interesting problem for you? I mean, you've got over 70 patents. You've written a book, which I like to talk about in a bit, which is about the heart of science. So when you encounter an interesting problem, talk about that process, because I think that's so interesting. Like, what makes a worthy problem?
Yeah, so I am a big believer in looking at the outside world, because sometimes many companies, corporate environments, we can get insular, and we're very fortunate at 3M that there's a lot of people who want to keep the ear to the ground of what's going on in the world. And actually, that reminds me, I think it's in your 40 Market Busters book where you talk about tectonic triggers. And I think I'm one of those people who loves mnemonic. If you look at my book, you'll see the acrostic style. Everything is this. So I'll tell you what I did with your things in there when I read that. It's trends, essentially. Technology, regulatory, environmental, natural, demographic, and social. Just to remember those things, it's like those things, always constantly be looking at those things. And once you see that, things start becoming apparent to you. So I call this the process of mosaic building. So what I do is I take these little tiles of information, whether it's technology that's developing in a certain area, or a regulatory shift that's coming, or environmental factors, or a demographic shift. And when I put that together, a picture starts to emerge. So you can see that art sort of coming in that science, but it's about putting this mosaic together. And it's a mosaic. It's not a puzzle that everything fits exactly so. You can just organically move these tiles. But when you see this picture, you go, this means this is going to be an issue. And are we ready when that happens? And how do we make ourselves ready? So then I start talking to people. I think we ought to do this. Let's just make up stuff. We're going to have to make pink tape. I think we're going to have to make pink tape. What do you think about that? Oh, no, we've got blue tape. It works really well. I don't think we need a pink tape. But how about this? If they start saying this, and if they start seeing this, and I bring all these tiles together, and slowly you see people saying, we may need pink tape, but we don't have this technology to make pink tape. Oh, don't worry about it. I'll work on that piece. So then what I do is I build this area of why we want to do it. Who agrees that we need to do it? Here are the potential opportunities we could have. Who will work with me to solve this problem? Because remember, I'm not the expert in the problem solving. I can identify the problem to solve, and I can work with people, but the actual chemistry has to be done by someone else. So then we get this team together, and then we apply for a grant, and usually we get it because we pulled a very compelling narrative. So this is where the humanities, the context of building a compelling story with the tiles you've got. And the first person you have to convince is yourself. But when you've convinced yourself and a few smart people, you can stand in front of a committee of peers and say, look, this is what's going on in the outside world. This is what's happening in the regulatory landscape. This is what the shift in the demographic is. This is what we think we need to do. The reason we can't do that is this technology building block is missing. Give me $71,000. We will develop this technology building block, and we can start building this platform out. Basically, that process I do over and over again in different areas that relate to our markets that we're in, or the potential of going into newer markets, that too. So it's a very, interesting process, and it actually keeps my, sort of the arts and humanities side alive, because it's about the intrigue of this process, the drama that it brings in, the mystery and the challenges and the satisfaction, the investigative journalism, detective work, then putting like an artist and then a storyteller, presenting the case like a lawyer, inspiring others to join the cause like a leader, and then, sort of craftsmen working on specific tasks and building the building blocks. So I love it, whether it's the work on tapes to keep diapers on wiggly babies or tapes that go into phones or trains, planes, automobiles. It's always that story that sticks.
Mm. And who gives the money? Like, where do the grants come from?
The corporate. So corporate has sanctioned our R&D organization that they give. So basically a committee of peers decides whether this is a good idea or not. So we get lots of proposals. They look at all the proposals that are selected, you get to present in front of the committee. And then they select the 5 or 10, they take it to the senior management, and they say, yep, these look good. And we get the money. So we get it for a year. So we get a year to work on our 15% time with all these other people to move the needle on it. We get to give a half yearly update, so people realize, oh my God, this is something that we should be doing in our, product development process, product introduction process. Or sometimes I've done this, I've gone back and said, I'm very close, but I need another year. So can I get a renewal on this grant? And here's all that we have done, and here's all the positive that's coming from it. And sometimes we get the renewal, so you can work on it for 2 years. So it's really rewarding. And I usually try to pull younger or newer folks into it, because once they see this process, that light bulb goes on of what is possible. What is possible? You could think of an idea, and then you have to self-budget. So there's no manager telling us what to do. We have to budget our own work. We have to schedule our own work. We have to scurry around and be resourceful about innovating, about getting stuff done under the radar. All those phenomenal skills which will last people a lifetime. Convincing yourself, telling the story, inspiring others to give of their time, resources, chemicals, tapes, backings, whatever it is, equipment, those skills and that network that you build. So my entire network comes from that. I would not have had a single networking meeting ever. It's all about talking about your work. It feels so authentic, so real, and you feel so passionate about your ideas that's how you build that network. So I always remind middle management that never underestimate the idea of a person that took the initiative, talked about it, got the grant, learned how to budget, learned how to network, and sell their ideas. These are exactly the things you want them to have when you're looking at them and evaluating. So that's also a healthy tension sometimes, right? Because people may say, what is this? Who is this person walking, asking for my people to be working on these things and things like that? And you have to tell the story. Look, that's the best thing that could ever happen to them, is to work on this, because now they will know what works, why it doesn't work, why the market cares, why the customer doesn't care, what are the trends, all those things, rather than just making the widget.
Mm-hmm. So once you've got, I'll call it a proof of concept, so you got, Eric Ries would call it a minimum viable product or a prototype, or something that's sort of, what happens next? Because that's where I see so many companies, they get to that stage and then it's like, they hit a wall. They just never take it beyond there.
I think the outcomes of the ones that I've had are across the board. There are some that are like, oh my God, you cracked this building block. That's exactly what is holding us back. And so we're going to take and run with this.
Does it go into a BU though, or does it go into some kind of incubator, or?
It'll go into a BU. It will actually go into a BU. And truth be told, in many cases, I pick things which I think my BU could implement.
Okay.
Because that is, but if they're bigger, sort of impact, because industrial tapes and industrial adhesives and industrial solutions can go into other areas as well. And when you work with enough people who have the ability to implement that in other areas, like your corporate partners, your corporate lab folks that I work closely with, then you know that it'll go into a different area, but I can at least commercialize it in mine. And then we have had all the way to the other end of the spectrum hit the wall, where people are like, this is a great idea. it's great that you have cracked this and made this prototype, but this is not part of our strategy of where we're going because we're focusing on X, Y, Z. Or we can't do this right now because we really don't have the resources or bandwidth to follow through on this. Or this is something that is not a strategic area at all for us. And the need that you have specified, Jayshree, and the trend that you are saying is going to happen in the scenario that you're developed, frankly, we're not bought into it. They won't say that, but I can see that in their faces. My answer is always the same. We have developed a technology building block. It may not be something that will be useful for now for us, but somewhere somebody will use it. And I have to tell you that every single thing that we have done has had such an outcome. So, starting from the very first product success I had to the most recent one, they were all not designed for where they ended up being. So the way I think about it is, in order to move mountains, you have to move the needle. Are you moving the needle? So the way we talk about that, instead of, oh my gosh, it went nowhere, I never say that. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's such a success because we solved this problem, we filed this patent, and now when they're ready to go, they can just pick this up and go with it. So sometimes it's just the stories we tell, and the stories we tell ourselves, and the stories we tell others. And I think it's very important to point out, because then people start talking like that. Oh yeah, this technology building block. Because if you ask people and you say, how were you able to do this? Well, it's because this was already ready. Who made it ready? Right? So it's very easy to focus on the organs. This is my latest thing that I've been telling a lot of people. It's easy to focus on the organs, but you miss sometimes the circulatory system, the nervous system, all these systems that are upholding these organs. Think about them. Think about them a little bit, how important they are, because they'll erode, they'll atrophy, and you don't want that. You want your people to have still everything that it takes to uphold these organs that you're so focused with your metrics on. So I would say across the board, and it's a good thing. That means we are pushing the paradigm, we're looking at things, we're trying out different things, but we have had some that have been very successful.
Well, one of the things your conversation has led me to think about is the whole concept of failure, and I don't even like the word, but when I ask companies, well, why do you struggle with innovation? You get back this long laundry list, right? So it's nobody's job. We don't have time for it. We don't have budget for it. We don't get rewarded for it. But one of the things that comes up over and over again is we don't like to fail. We do have a fear of failure, and I think part of the problem is that in many companies anyway, we have this completely unrealistic expectation that managers are somehow magically able to predict what's going to happen in an uncertain future. And if they don't predict what's going to happen in an uncertain future, then they've failed. And I just think that's a crazy way of looking at the world.
Right.
And 3M is pretty famous for having what's called a failure tolerant culture. And maybe you could spell out some of the elements of that for people that aren't from such a culture.
Yeah, I think the hallmarks of that culture are exactly what I talk about. So the way I talk about it is, people ask us all the time, what is the secret sauce, right? So I say, if you don't do these things, it would be a mistake. So it's errors, ERRORS. So E is the expectation, there's got to be an expectation. You walk into 3M, everybody knows there's an expectation that you're going to be innovative. And it does wonders for, the interestingly motivated are always going to do that. But for the rest, it is huge to know that there's an expectation. Then there's the risk-taking that my employee, if I'm the manager, is not just working on what I think they should be working on. I'm taking the risk for letting them have this culture of empowerment. 15%, you can do whatever you want, right? Then the resources. So we get the money. So how would I have pushed these ideas? I mean, I can make this little sample, but in order to run a trial or to buy the chemicals or to get some information on the outside, I need the funds. And I'm not going to go to my manager because this is not something that is directly related to them. The corporation is providing these funds, and we have kept these systems going, which is huge. And so then there's the opportunity. So what if I come up with something? What will happen to it? Well, there's a lot of opportunity to commercialize it because you are linked up to all these different ways you can get it into the pipeline. Reward. If you don't reward people, this is going to be difficult to get them energized about these things. When we talk about it, well, how many Genesis grants have they had? How many Discover proposals have they submitted? That just shows that you are caring about all of that. And we actually also have an award called the Golden Acorn. So that is given to the idea that, moved the needle the most within that 1 year. So I've been a fortunate recipient of that. And it's so exciting. I got the inaugural one, our team did, and we were so happy. So look, we have such a groundbreaking idea. We were able to move it so much, and we got this. So I proudly display it in my office. And then the final one is socialization, constant socialization of this concept. Never let it die down. We're innovative people. It's an innovative company. This is what we do, and we mean how we do it with our 15%, with our Genesis grants, with our tech forum, with our culture of empowerment, and the signs applied to life. We're improving lives, we're enhancing homes, we're advancing companies. So pulling it all together, I think, is extremely important. And to be honest, you go through periods where there may be pockets of places where people are trying to sort of pull back from it. We just keep reminding of McKnight principles. I mean, McKnight was so ahead of his time when he said the things he said. And so all of us have this thing posted right. It's like, if you wanted, put boundaries around people, should have hired cheap, hire good people, leave them alone. I mean, those are all, you'll find technical people having them in their offices just to remind people in case they forget that this is what it's all about. So
McKnight, just for those that don't know, McKnight was the founder of 3M and wrote a great book whose title escapes me now, but he basically laid out all those principles, which I think more ordinary companies are now realizing is absolutely essential if you're competing in very dynamic markets. That you need to have this pipeline of innovations. You need to be investing in the future. You need to not be just exploiting what you're doing today. And he was really ahead of his time. I mean, that was very unusual. That was in the 1930s, I think, right? That he was writing.
Yep. His quotes are just so inspiring. And I'm one of those people who just loves reading those quotes, and you go, wow, it's so true. It's hard to do, though. Absolutely, I admit that it's hard to do when you're looking at the short term and you're looking at results and you're driving for productivity and efficiency and letting the human context come into that, where some person, I'm going to wait for them to be inspired, then they're going to come up with this, then they're going to do this, and then they're going to work with others, and then they'll go down the wrong path. It's extremely hard for those who have never done it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So
one of the things that I've been talking about a lot in the pandemic is there are cadres of management leaders, people in leadership roles who've never done anything except keep the wheels on the bus turning. And so when you tell them that there's a whole technology to innovation, which is well understood, which we you just articulated it right, which we know it works, we know it's great, and they look at you like you grew two heads. I mean, they're like, what? I have to let people do whatever they want. What? And what they don't understand is that there's an underlying discipline to it, right?
Yes, and that trust. You've got to have trust. And once trust erodes, and it is very difficult. So I think those relationships, once you know people, once you know their passion, once you see that they're driven, I think it makes a difference. And frankly, when leaders come in and they're trying to run the business by an Excel spreadsheet, you miss a whole lot of this. You miss the people behind this. And I'm so glad that in this day and age, especially after the pandemic, people are realizing that people are people. Right? I mean, you got to let that be. And there's a methodology behind this. So initially I used to be like, you just come up with these ideas, you just think of them. But now more and more, ever since I wrote the book and all of these things, when I present, I keep talking about it. So when I get asked, what are you doing in the pandemic? I think about it. It's like, well, you can clearly see that there's going to be a next normal or new normal or whatever it is, right? So what actionable insight does that give you? What are all the things that have been accelerated that require immediate action to stay relevant? You see the acceleration of digital and telehealth and banking, education, retail. What does that mean for the path your products are on, Mr. Manager or Miss Manager, or technologies? And what are some actionable insights that you could do now to adapt to this new normal? That is something you could be doing. Then you can clearly see that all this change around us and has revealed vulnerabilities big time. shortcomings, big time, strengths, big time. So how can that lead to a strategic foresight? By challenging what you thought were old truths. So as you're looking at the new normal, think about the old truths. And it's an opportunity to examine, are we adapting? What are we learning? How are we adjusting our future plans? You know, it is a strange time. It's this punctuated equilibrium some people have called, but let's challenge these old truths and new opportunities will emerge. There's a method behind that. And then the third thing is forget about everybody else. Look at your own operational oversight in this very, very brief window of time. What can you do to streamline and simplify and do things that add value, right? Because we all saw the structures and the systems and the processes and the strategies that were re-examined in this window. So it's a really good time to look at those things. And it seems counterintuitive to do in this period of change, but a crisis can eliminate options, can shift opinions. I mean, look at what happened, right? HR, big corporations, work from home, leave policy, external collaboration, virtually overnight, right? All that is within our operational oversight. So, you know, it's NOW now, new normal, old truths, and window in time. And if we can do that, we get actionable insight, we get strategic foresight, and we can see what is in our operational oversight. So I kind of keep thinking about these things. It's like there is a method. Like you said, there is a method behind coming up with the problems to solve. And this strategy has given me 3 problems that I'm really trying to push for us to, and these are areas we don't know much about. I don't know much about, but it's like getting me fired up because I look at the world around and I can clearly see there'll be opportunities, and we don't clearly know how we would play. Because that's another favorite question, Rita. People can ask, well, I don't see how we can. Yeah, you don't. That's the point. Because if you saw how you can, somebody would have done it.
Right, exactly.
And if you're going to have me look in the rearview mirror every time you want to evaluate something, well, no point, right? So you got to speak about that. And the trick there is to get enough people excited about it that the naysayers are kind of like, maybe I'm missing something. I better be quiet in this and let's see how this rolls along, you know. But my whole thing is back to our point about failure. It's not going to be a failure. We'll learn something because we're looking into a new area. We're figuring out how to look at a new area, because I frankly don't want this to be a pandemic of the uninspired, because in the pockets, you can see that also. It's like people walking around uninspired. It's like, no, this pandemic should serve as an inspiration to do a whole lot and some.
To do new things. Yeah. So Frank Kelberg wants to know, what do the best leaders who work for 3M do and what do they not do? Which is an interesting question.
Well, the best leaders realize that there is more to leadership than the Excel spreadsheet. There's a whole PowerPoint that comes with it. And the PowerPoint is really the story. The Excel is just the data, and really we need the story. So the real leaders ask the questions to get to the story. If I may bring more of a humanities context to this, the 3 subjects that I loved the most in school were history, civics, and geography, right? Good leaders understand social studies. They want to know the history of what the organization has been through. They want to understand or want to unpack what these people are packing as baggage. Very important for a good leader. They want to understand the civics, and underneath the civics umbrella is the politics. And they want to understand the geography. They want to get the lay of the land. Only then do you understand how to move forward. And so many times you see leaders come in and nothing happened before I was here, so let's ignore that. I really don't need to understand the lay of the land because it doesn't matter. It's all the same in all businesses. And who cares about people? I'm going to tell them what to do with this process that I got that worked in my XYZ job or XYZ role. Recipe for failure, Frank, let me tell you, very frankly. And you see that over and over again, but, you know, and that's why I just always wait for those books to be written, which tell people like it is, like they should hear this. And very seldom do they get to hear some of these things because, you know, somehow we have carved leadership roles out to be very short-term focused, immediate results, which leads to running the business by Excel, not getting out and building relationships, asking the right questions. So what I like is somebody used in our at 3M leader that I used to really admire, engaged, knowledgeable leadership. And all three words are really loaded in my mind: engaged, knowledgeable, leadership. That's what I think leaders should be doing. Are you asking the right questions? Are you understanding the social studies of the organization that you are trying to lead, the history, civics, and geography? So bring in that humanities. We've all done those subjects. Think about how important it is not to ignore history. Even if you look at the world outside, you understand what ignoring history and not understanding the depth of it has done, and even in the science, we're seeing how the politics plays in, and even in the geography, we're seeing the lay of the land is different in different areas and different parts of the companies and different parts of the countries and things like that. So very important. I think in the book you'll find this. This is interesting. I've never been a people leader, like literally never, maybe a few months or so. Yep. And I talk about leadership in there because I believe that a leader isn't just a people manager. A leader is one who leads, and you can lead with your ideas and your thoughts, and you can lead from your own rung of the ladder. You don't have to be ordained to lead. That's what my philosophy is. So I say 5 things that leaders have to do. 1 and 2 everybody knows about and hears about all the time: the microscope and the telescope, right? You got to look at the telescope and know where the company is going, where the business is going, and plan the vision and all of that. And you've got to have your eye on the microscope because you need to be knowing what's going on in the detail. And I love metaphors, and metaphorical thinking is a powerful tool when you want to visualize leadership concept. But the 3 that I think people miss. The 3rd is the periscope. Because microscope and telescope give you the direct line of sight. The periscope is look out, look over, look back, around, exactly. So you have to be able to anticipate change and proactively identify. And to quote Rita, you gotta see the snow melting at the edges, seeing around the corners. That's the periscope, right? It's not direct line of sight. The 4th one is the stethoscope. Look within. See what cannot be seen but only felt. Listen to the heart, your own and others. And that's how you're going to be able to inform and inspire. And so good leaders do that. And the not so good leaders don't know that people have hearts and they have hearts, and you got to be constantly listening to that. And the final one is the horoscope. See and acknowledge what you can't control and be grateful for the role of luck and chance. So humility makes for authentic leaders. And as a good leader, you have to use all these views to really enjoy the kaleidoscope of true leadership. Long answer, Frank.
I think that's wonderful. I love your use of metaphors. That's terrific. So talk about the book. What inspired you to write it? You've got great stories in it. Some of the thinking in the book was actually in the best-selling book, The Range by David Epstein. Tell us about that process.
Yeah, so I've always wanted to write a book, but never got the sort of opportunity to do it. And then the pandemic comes, and then we have this raw and revealing nature of what transpired right in our backyard. And it just completely shook, everybody. But it was just so jarring for us in Minnesota. For those of you who don't know, we're headquartered in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the George Floyd murder happened in Minneapolis, right in our backyard. And it just made me think about all the things that I wasn't paying attention to, right? I was just like moving on and doing stuff and really not thinking about what's going on in the outside world as much as I then thought I should have. And, I had pretty much of a, sort of colorblind, all those kind of things, that mentality. I'm just doing my thing and it's doing a good job, and that's all that matters. And then when your eyes get open to the systemic aspect of some of these things, it's just crazy, right? So on a personal level, I felt that urgency to educate myself on the structural nature of what this is. And then I read a lot, reflected, and I ruminated and tried to figure out where I stand on this. And I could clearly see my own pockets of privilege, right? I have a lot of privilege and I wanted to be able to use it. So I just thought, I'm going to get this award from the Society of Women Engineers, their highest achievement award. And when I had presented at their conference the year ago, the things that I said really resonated with people. Just these little bite-sized things about things that I've noticed about leadership, strategy, management, work, science, humanities. And I thought, what if I take all these writings that I have and compile them in a book, and then maybe we can use all the sales to go for a scholarship for a Black woman in STEM. That was exactly the idea. And I'm like, let me think about how to make this happen. So I just cold called the CEO of Society of Women Engineers, Karen Horting, and I had my whole situation prepared, what I'm going to say. And I said, I want to do this. And she's like, okay, done. And I was like, and she's like, no, done. Jayshree, we're all feeling this. So hats off to Rachel for just thinking exactly on that same wavelength. And it was incredible. And I said, okay. And she's like, do it. And we can launch it during the event where you're going to get the award anyway. So we get the word out on the book. So Rita, I am very excited to let you know that we have sold enough copies to have the first woman in STEM, underrepresented minority, actually starting school in fall. So I'm super excited.
Where's she going?
So we don't know yet. They haven't told me yet. So they're working through that right now. So I'm so excited that something like this can actually make a change. So I think we're all waiting to do something at a collective level, at a societal level, but there's so much power to doing something at an individual level. And I should point out, like a book I read, Dolly Chug's book, The Person You Mean to Be, that really helped me. It's like, yes, I'm not a bad person. It wasn't a binary good, bad thing, but it just forced you to think through what you can do to help this situation, So I went through that whole process in my mind. And for those of you who think about VUCA, right? So it used to be that it is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It became vulnerability, unpredictability, it became contentious and amplified. And then I read about VUCA that Bill George came up with, to combat the first VUCA. So I thought, I'm going to do my own VUCA for this. So it's values, unity, commitment, and acknowledgement. That's what's going to get us out of this. So I really thought that acknowledgement and a commitment to do something at an individual level would be great. And then that's why even at 3M at a collective level, right, when we do the survey and found out about 3M State of Science Index results in 2021, people said you need more diversity in STEM, social justice, all of that started creeping into how the public views science. And that's how, we did the docuseries, Not the Science Type, because people clearly said we need more diversity in STEM. We understand the issues. Science needs this diversity. Innovation is needed, and we need to encourage more women and girls. And so people should check out our docuseries also, Not the Science Type. It basically shows 4 women who are confronting stereotypes about science and scientists and who goes, who persists, who excels. And we hope to inspire with that as well. So even at the organizational level, we are thinking along the same lines, So the book was really my individual sort of effort. So I really encourage your listeners to go by, because then we can have more scholarships. So it's a win-win-win.
That's really wonderful. So you mentioned women in STEM, women in science, women in leadership. You and I are, I think, of a similar generation. And so because you're in the role that you're in, you get sort of, there are people who would say, oh, she's a woman. And then everything else you do kind of like, and I never thought of myself that way, but I'm sure there are people who dealt with you that way. So maybe just a few minutes on your own, how you deal with setbacks, how you broke through, what you're advising younger women to do. I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I never thought of myself. I was just a scientist doing my job, going about my business. And then suddenly, women scientists, women this, and it just takes a little getting used to, because you're never really certain, if I may be honest, whether it's some sort of a diss on you or are you being elevated in a way. I'm never really clear on it, but it took me a whole process of getting over it, because then I realized that if I am viewed in a certain way and that helps others, I'm all for it. Mm-hmm. If me being a woman scientist does some good out there where people see me and they say, I want to aspire to be a scientist because of that, go for it, Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a strange thought process in your head, because you've gone through your entire life never even thinking about it. And there are reasons behind that, right? I grew up in a country where our prime minister, most of the time when I was growing up, was a woman. So I never thought there were things that women can or can't do. Even though I grew up in a strongly patriarchal society, it wasn't like, and our parents were telling all the girls, all my girlfriends, we were all told you have to become engineers because we grew up in this premier engineering institution. The one country we talked about, England had a woman prime minister as well. And then most of our neighboring countries had women leaders. So it was a different thinking in my head. In fact, when I came to the US, I saw it more, where it was like, well, women this, women that. Oh, you are the only woman in the lab. And I took it in a stride. Only in looking back, I realized, oh my God, there were 14 men. I was the only woman there. But it didn't ever bother me because I just made my way through it and all of that. But it's interesting. Mentees and people like my daughter point out, that's the problem. You make it look easy and then everybody thinks it's easy and you've just ignored all of these things, and you shouldn't be doing that. You should be calling some of these systems out and changing them. So it really made me reflect and think about all the things that I haven't spoken about, things that I do see are different, who gets rewarded, who gets promoted, how confidence is viewed, portrayed, how my context to what I bring to projects is so important. But when you see templates of how projects are presented, it's all the Excel, the PowerPoint is lost. It's like, why am I not vocal enough to bring that so I can inspire more women who are in STEM to feel energized and not leave, and we have a leaky pipeline problem because we don't talk about STEM the way we should. So I'm very open and transparent about the fact that yes, when I get a new opportunity, I am freaked out thinking, oh my God, I can't do it. But then I have trained my brain to tell myself, yes, you can, because you've done this and that was different. You've done this there and that was different. So I'm very transparent about that's just the process. And our survival depended on it, that women and men think differently. Our survival depends on it now because women and men think differently. So go for it. Be your authentic self. Be very open about it. And it doesn't mean that confidence or whatever it is that people are perceiving can only be one way. So I constantly think about the social circles and spheres. I think about my informal and formal connections. I think about the local community and culture. How are we creating opportunity and what constructs we are giving, the societal classifications, all of that, in order to make sure that we can inspire more diversity in STEM, women and underrepresented minorities, because we have so many problems to solve. We need to unlock the secrets to a sustainable future. What better than to put a human context around that?
That's inspiring.
That will be so inspiring for all young folks who are so compelled. They want to do something, but you put that in that right context, not just the facts, evidence, data, but the human context. I think it's a great time for women in STEM. Absolutely.
It could be really inspiring. And one of the other things that the research shows is many products and services and offerings are not geared to women. Mm-hmm. They're not geared to people of color. They're not geared to people who are not represented by the scientists that are pursuing them. And it makes sense, if as you said, the process of innovation is to some extent serendipitous. And if you have only a homogeneous set of brains thinking about it, you're just going to get one set of problem sets that are presented. So I think it's a huge issue. And I talk about why so many companies miss weak signals of change. It's because they have a very homogeneous view of the world and a homogeneous leadership culture. And it's a really big Achilles heel potentially.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think sometimes women, because we are critical of ourselves, I'm generalizing here, critical of ourselves, unsure of ourselves in the way that the confidence is perceived, in a bravado style, and also overthink some things, and also sometimes are a lot more contextual decision makers. But I say, give it a different story. I consider all of them huge positives. And have I been vocal about that before? No. But now that I have this position and at a certain age, it's just, you just go, that's actually a positive. Right. What are you talking about? If only more people made more contextual decisions, we wouldn't be in this problem that we're in. So I say, go for it. Let's make all these things be very transparent and say, yes, I'm actually proud of the fact that I can be worrying about dinner, kids, parents, all of that, and still perform the way I do. Think about it. Could you? No.
It's a superpower. It totally is.
It's a superpower. So yeah, let not other people diss it, right? So let's be transparent about it. I don't want to read the books about how to manage it. No, I want to exploit it because it's a gift.
Well, Jayshree, this has been just such a pleasure. That time has just flown. Where do people find out more? What should they do to take the next step in their journeys?
I'm on LinkedIn. So please follow and also elevate some of those ideas if they resonate, because it's important for innovation and it's important for our future.
So LinkedIn would be the primary place you direct people.
Yes, I haven't quite figured out Twitter and Instagram. My kids will laugh at me if I do that. So I'm on there, but LinkedIn, I'm active. Now that they're adults, they actually have seen it and they are still embarrassed, but I'm just going to do my thing.
There you go. And eventually they'll figure it out.
Well, they secretly admire it, is what I've been told. So there.
Well, thank you so much for spending an hour with us, and good luck with the book and the Not the Science Type and putting a human face to the process of scientific discovery. It's very inspiring.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much. This is a dream come true, and I'm a big fan, and I appreciate what you do.